An historic announcement at the White House this week as President Joe Biden names Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson as his pick for the next Supreme Court justice. Biden keeping his campaign pledge to nominate the first ever black woman to the Supreme Court. 51-year-old Judge Jackson is Harvard educated. If she's confirmed, she would replace the retiring Justice Stephen Breyer, who she clerked for early in her career. She served as a public defender, a federal trial court judge, and on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit.
She steps up to fill Justice Breyer's place in the court with a uniquely accomplished and wide-ranging background.
I am truly humbled by the extraordinary honor of this nomination, and I am especially grateful for the care that you have taken in discharging your constitutional duty in service of our democracy with all that is going on in the world today.
During confirmation for her current position, Jackson Brown received support from 3 Republican senators. We'll see where that goes. My next guest is a senior political analyst and anchor at CNN. His new book is Lincoln and the Fight for Peace, exposing the importance of the president's enduring impact on our nation, all the way to the current administration. Great book. I've read it. It's right here. John Avlon, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Glad to be with you.
Let's sort of start with the news that came to us at the end of the week, the appointment of Judge Jackson. You know, and I'll have Lincoln in my mind throughout our entire interview, but, you know, 3 Republicans supported her a year ago when she got her position on the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. That was then. The balance of the court isn't going to change as a result, but I imagine you won't see the same numbers this time around.
I would imagine, but you'd like to think she'll get some Republican support. I mean, again, after all, as you say, she got 3 Republican votes within recent years. So, you know, there's no reason to change your vote, at least not all of them. I think the problem is we've moved away. I mean, both, you know, days when Antonin Scalia and Ruth Bader Ginsburg were both confirmed with over 90 votes in the Senate. There was basically a bipartisan tradition that said that you don't have to agree with all of their positions. You have to agree they make a good justice, and the president has a right to appoint nominees to the court. But you have had a political hijacking of the process. Now it's a simple majority, and I think that further erodes cooperation in the country, and it also erodes, ultimately, it runs the danger of eroding faith in the independence and nonpartisan nature of the judicial branch. But hopefully we can heal these breaches, and it's a major step forward in terms of a representative court as well for the country, obviously.
Yeah, and let's talk about that. Of course, again, you write about Lincoln, but what's interesting about that book, by the way, is it doesn't end with Lincoln. That last quarter or so of the book takes a look at Lincoln's philosophies and thoughts as it moves forward into crises that happened after him. So that was a surprise for me to get to. Let's talk about today's crises. Lincoln, of course, surrounded himself with rivals, people all of whom thought they should be president. But yet that's how he used them to face the challenges of war. So let's talk about war for a moment, Ukraine, Russia. How does President Biden deal with opposition of conservative, not only the conservative Republicans who are, you know, not necessarily all behind him, but the conservative media as well, who seem to have been supportive of Putin?
Well, that's a surreal circumstance, and I think it's important to realize how unprecedented that is in American history. To have, you know, our Senator Arthur Vandenberg, a Republican who worked with Harry Truman to push through the Marshall Plan, once famously said that partisan politics ought to end at the water's edge, meaning that there should be broad agreement when it comes to foreign policy in the United States in a dangerous world. That obviously no longer exists. We've seen a resurgence of the isolationist impulse in American politics, which had been beaten back after the first America First movement in the run-up to the Second World War. But it is stunning to see Republicans, whose party has been overwhelmingly dedicated in recent decades to an internationalist approach to foreign policy, obviously Eisenhower, Reagan, the Bushes, attack President Biden simultaneously, and some of them express admiration for Vladimir Putin as he, with total predictability, invades a sovereign nation. And I'm speaking particularly of ex-President Donald Trump and his minions. So that is such a departure from anything we've seen in our history. It's a total disgrace. Now, President Biden has tried to basically reassert the strength of the multilateral coalitions, the international order that America built with its allies in the wake of the Second World War, when, crucially, we won the peace. We won the peace by setting up countervailing organizations to push back individuals and countries who believed that might makes right. That's the essence of the international order that America built. That's what we need to defend right now. And that's what America's trying to do, short of bringing in troops. But I must say, sanctions, even elevated sanctions, might not be enough. They need to be tough. They need to be targeted. They need to be expansive. And then, to my eyes, there's no reason to wait to go further.
Domestically, Lincoln, as you write, asked people to rise above personal and partisan politics to address the Civil War. President Biden has asked people to do the same thing as he's talked about uniting the country. It's not going as well for him. Would Lincoln have any better luck today?
I mean, look, Lincoln was an outlier in his time, but I do think the leadership secrets of Abraham Lincoln do show how you can be a uniter in divided times. Part of the virtue of studying Lincoln and the Civil War now is a simple reminder that we've been more divided before. We've been through tough times as a country. We can emerge. It does require leaders who can balance moderation with moral courage. One of the Lincoln's superpowers was empathy, honesty, humor, humility, and the way that those essential personal qualities informed his principles, his politics, and his policies. It required reaching out, not demonizing people you disagree with. Joe Biden, I think, like Lincoln, shows that kindness can be consistent with effective leadership. That was one of the things that was so powerful, but the example that Lincoln set. But he lives in a time, we live in a time, where our politics have again divided along tribal lines, north, south, black, white. And that's very fraught. The one thing I'll say is, given the experience we had with the Civil War, any indulgence of casual talk about a second Civil War, such an insult to the dead who died in the Civil War, 750,000 of them. We don't need to do this again. We need to rise above our divides again, and Lincoln's leadership can help show us how to do it as citizens and as elected representatives in Washington and our respective state capitals.
So President Biden gives his State of the Union on Tuesday night. You write that losers of the Civil War needed to have a sense of ownership in the Reconstruction, but first they had to accept defeat. It's as though you were speaking to the election of 2020, because Biden, of course, is facing people who do not accept a defeat from their previous war, so to speak.
Yes, and that's a cult-like belief in the big lie, which it's felt is a new form of the lost cause mythology, which spurred some Southerners in the wake of the Civil War. Accepting defeat is a basic precondition of democracy. So is believing in the essential goodwill of your fellow citizens. That trust has been eroded. Because people are believing in a lie, because we've lived through an insurrection in our capital. The Republican Party has an obligation to try to, coax some resemblance to being the actual party of Lincoln again, and to have more individuals with courage to speak out against the cult of the big lie and just speak the honest truth. Let's have a principal disagreements about politics and policy all day long, not about basic facts out of fear and greed, which is all the emotions that we're seeing right now. So President Biden's got a tall order. Sometimes foreign conflicts can unite a nation. I think there are fissures in the Republican Party over Ukraine that actually are hopeful. Some people are actually speaking up and denouncing Donald Trump's feting of Vladimir Putin. But we need to reunite as a nation again. We desperately need to do that, and Lincoln can help show us how.
John, I got 10 seconds for this. If Lincoln were giving the State of the Union on Tuesday night, fill in the blank. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight the state of our union is
fraught, but not fragile. We're strong at the end of the day.
John Avlon, CNN political analyst, thank you so much. The book, Lincoln and His Fight for Peace, great book, great read. I encourage it. It's in bookstores and online now. Coming up next, on to the State House.